Welcome to the second workshop in ASPA's third annual Social Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Series, or SETI. These workshops were originally scheduled to be held in ASPA 2020 in Anaheim, but obviously this couldn't happen due to COVID. And through the work of several section sponsors and conveners, we're happy to present these workshops online. Today's workshop is presented by Dr. Meghna Sabharwal and is on creating inclusive workspaces. And this session lasts until 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. But before introducing Dr. Sabharwal, we'd like to draw attention to the other webinars in this series, and we're going to be sharing some RSVP links with everyone here in a moment. So first, we'd like to let you know about on October 27th, Dr. Stephen Patansu, who's also joining us today. Thank you, Dr. Patansu. We'll discuss incorporating SETI into mission plans and performance management. And on December 9th, Dr. Richard Gregory Johnson III will discuss weaving SETI into curricula. So again, you can see the RSVP links there, and we hope you're going to be able to join us. So without further ado, let me introduce today's speaker. So we're proud today to be joined by Dr. Meghna Sabharwal. Dr. Sabharwal is professor and department head of public and nonprofit management at the University of Texas at Dallas, and she has done extensive research, teaching, and service regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're just so happy to have you today with us, Dr. Sabharwal. Thank you so much for doing this, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sean, for this warm welcome. Hello, everyone, wherever you are. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, but I'm so glad you all could join us. I really want to thank ASPA and especially DSJ and Sean's and his team's efforts to spearhead all these different workshops. I also want to acknowledge, I know that various sections have collaborated on these efforts, including SWAPA, SPOD, SNAPS, LGBT section, SPCM. I'm sorry if I missed out on someone else, but thank you all again for having me. So this workshop, I did want to do it more a workshop style, but given COVID and all the restrictions we have, I'm going to try my best. So you are not just going to be hearing one way, but you'll have to work a little bit. I may ask questions, so please feel free to put that in the chat. We will have a breakout room at some point, and we'll give you instructions. So I want to make this fun for you and for me. And so feel free to ask questions on the chat. And I know Sean's helping me moderate that. So without further ado, starting off, here's a number for you. What do you think that number is? For those of you still counting all the zeros, it's close to about 2 billion. Put some stuff on the chat. What do you think this number is? And Sean can tell me whatever's coming up on the chat.
Absolutely. So if everyone needs some help finding the chat button at the bottom of your screen, there should be a little icon that says talk or chat. It looks like a little bubble that you would see in a comic book. So you can go ahead and click on that. You should be able to see. And we already have something from Dr. Pooja Paswan. It says, guess is here is approximately population of India, was one guess.
Oh, well, Dr. Paswan, thank you, good guess, but not quite.
And then we have Gohubin Lee said a population of something. And then Dr. Stacy Zavataro said, my snarky answer is the deficit for today.
That's right. Maybe deficit for today. You know, I sometimes when I put this up, students will tell me it's the national debt. I'm like, that's too low to be national debt. But yeah, for the day, possibly. Yeah. Well, this is a number. Thank you for your responses. This is what comes up on Google when you type the word diversity. So you can imagine the amount of interest and the research and every organization talking about this term diversity. Of course, the numbers go down a little bit when you type in inclusion, diversity and inclusion, but just wanted to give you this, you know, this idea of the scope of the topic of diversity and the interest in it. So what is diversity? I have a definition, which I like from Thomas Roosevelt. Thomas Roosevelt's done a lot of work on diversity management. And Thomas talks about it as collective differences and similarities. We often focus, the term diverse means different, right? So we often focus so much on the differences, we forget about the similarities part of it. And that's why I thought this definition encompasses not just the differences, similarities, but then also talks about the related tensions and complexities that come with diversity. Oftentimes we think that let's just bring in a diverse group together, things are going to be fine, we all will sing kumbaya and it will all be wonderful. It doesn't quite work that way. There are going to be tensions involved. There's going to be a complex environment being created, and how does one manage that? And that's what diversity is all about. You know, we often focus on gender and race as the key dimensions of diversity. But as you all know, diversity comes in so many forms, you know, marital status, parenthood, your sexual orientation, age, the generational differences. I mean, all of these encompass definitely what we think of when we think of diversity. Language, you know, food is interesting because you build bridges around that. So that is all form of diversity. But we are very focused on race in academia or generally because, or gender, because two things, I think. One is it's so visible in our face. We think we know what a person's race is just by looking at them, and that's not always quite true. And same thing, you know, with gender. And then there's also data availability around these two main key dimensions of diversity. But why should I care about diversity? Why should I care? And here are the numbers for you, right? Look at the current numbers close to 2018, and then 2060, we are going to be looking very, very different than what we look today. Hispanic non-white will be close to 30% of the population. And you see this multiracial group is growing, and that group multiracial, much higher numbers in groups of ages under 18. So Asians, that sector is growing as well. So those demographics of our country, we all know, are certainly changing. And what do we do about it as public administrators, as people who care about this topic? You know, when I've talked about diversity to people, some of them come back and tell me, well, we all like to believe that everybody's equal, we all should be treated equally, aren't we all human beings? I agree 100% that yes, everybody should be treated equally, but the problem is that every individual is unique and they've had very different experiences. And so equal doesn't mean equitable, right? And this whole workshop, and I know that prior to me, Jade Berry talked about this. And so this is important to know that equality does not equate to equity, right? So treating everybody equally doesn't solve the purpose. Likewise, some people will say, well, I'm colorblinded, or I don't see race, I don't see age, I don't see any of these things. And that's not always true too, right? You are tainted, or you are prejudiced, you have your own stereotypes. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So while yes, we all may want the same things, we all want liberty, life, pursuit of happiness, but our journeys to get to that point have been very different. You know, experiences of possible oppression, mistreatment of certain members, of members in our society, may not be individual, but just as members of that group, you have experienced some of that. And so these have altered the needs of these various group members. And so we need to understand these differences. And that's why it's important to talk about these issues. And this is a great graphic. I'm sure people have seen this, equity versus equality. I think it pretty much lays it out here, what that difference is. And you know, even the thought of colorblindedness, if you think about it, it creates a society that denies negative racial experiences, rejects cultural heritages, you know, invalidates unique perspectives that individuals have. So this very approach taken by our leaders today, I'm sorry to say this, but the new executive order that is ending racial sensitivity trainings, diversity trainings, that's going to be harmful. It's going to create more fractions. And so it's important then, you know, that we talk about these issues and then talk about diversity and beyond. So diversity is truly about numbers, usually in organizations, you know, how many people we have from a certain group or certain race or a certain gender, a certain demographic. And that's the first step, but that's not the be all and end all. And most organizations usually end there. And I think we need to go beyond that. And that's where I argue that one needs to go from diversity to inclusion. So this is a popular quote you all might have seen by Verna Myers. She's a consultant for Netflix on diversity and inclusion. And Verna Myers says diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. And so I like this quote, but I sometimes even go a little bit further and say, while that's great to be invited to dance, what do you know if that person even wants to dance? Or what do you know if that person, once invited to the party, will not be faced with other barriers, right? So you cannot even end at that point of just inviting someone. You have to take it a little bit further. How many of you bakers in the house? I'm sure some people like to bake or at least eat a cake. I love cake. So here's my metaphor for it. If I gave you all the ingredients to bake a cake, do you think you can bake a good cake? Yes or no? Put yes or no in the chat. So if I gave you all the ingredients to bake, say, a chocolate cake, do you think you can bake a perfect cake?
There are quite a lot of answers here, quite a lot of no's, quite a lot of yeses. Got yes, but with a recipe. Got an it depends. One person said I could make a cake, but it wouldn't be good.
That sounds like me. But yeah, no, so you will need a lot of things, right? I just give you a recipe. And if you gave a recipe to me and said, Meghna, bake the cake, even that may not be enough. But yes, just ingredients are not enough. You certainly need a recipe. Even then you can mess it up. You need, the right conditions, right? You may need the right temperature in the oven. You need all the proper process of mixing things. I know there's a process to it. So you need all of these things to come together to then be able to bake this very nice chocolate cake. So similarly, if we just have a group of diverse people, it doesn't mean it will automatically lead to inclusion. You won't get this perfect cake. You really have to work towards it. We need the right leadership. We need the individual efforts. We need input of these people we put in those positions. We need to empower them in decision making. We have to create this climate of acceptance. We have to suspend our judgments. We do that all the time. We have to be aware of cultural acceptance, cultural norms. So all of these things have to happen in order to then create this inclusive environment. So ingredients are fine, that's the first step, but that's not the end. And that's the same thing with diversity. It's the first step, but there's more to that. I would like you all to take a minute to reflect on a time when you knew you really mattered to someone or a group. So what behaviors and language made you feel like you belong? And you can put it in your chat, you can put a 1 word, 2 words, a sentence, but what behaviors and language made you feel like you truly belong?
We're already getting some answers, Dr. Sabharwal.
Okay.
Do you want me to read some out?
Yes, please.
Okay, so Tinsley Spetz Mitchell says listening with intention and not being interrupted while speaking. Got another person who said the phrase happy to see you. Then we have when I explicitly heard, oh, I'm glad you're here. Another person says took the time to know my interests. And another one was I was welcome and told that my participation was important.
Right. Oh, wonderful answers, wonderful answers. All of these reflect to that somebody took interest in you as a person, as a unique person. How is your day? How can you contribute? How is it that I can help you? Even a smile, even a thank you, not being judgmental about you. Also that input that you really matter, not talking over you. We've seen this happen way too many times, and there's a lot of research on that. And so about minorities, about gender, that how they can be talked over. So the whole idea is that you feel like you're accepted. You're accepted for who you are, right? And so that truly is inclusion. So here's a definition. Inclusion is the need to belong to a group, and at the same time, you maintain a unique identity. So if you think about the metaphor that, I'm an immigrant myself. I came to the US 20 years ago from India. And when we came here, we were, things were different then. 9/11 just happened, 2001. It was just a year into me coming to the US. And immediately we had directives coming from everywhere, including our university, that you need to stop wearing your clothes, Indian clothes, because you can be a target. And so blend in, and that's the message, right? Assimilate, blend in. And that's a little bit of a challenge that we've had, because then what happens is your unique identity is lost. Of course, those times were different. They were scared of our safety and security, so I understand. But oftentimes we are said we are the melting pot, right? The US is a melting pot, which is a good metaphor, but I think we need to push that a little bit, because that means you shed your identity, shed who you are as a person, and then you completely just melt into this, the fabric of this nation. But the new metaphor is be a salad bowl, where you can still mix things up and taste everything individually. So that's where we want to strive for, is you still want to be together yet maintain that unique identity, and that's what inclusion is. But oftentimes we see in organizations, in our own workplaces, people will talk about diversity and inclusion. It almost, they're talking about it hand in hand, like, oh, we have diversity and then it's going to lead to inclusion. And so we have to be mindful about that. These are not terms that are interchangeable. You really have to work on it. Of course, inclusion does not happen without diversity. And so that's the first step, but be mindful that they don't happen automatically. It takes time and efforts. A lot of research around inclusion. There's definitely research coming up in public administration. We just had a wonderful symposium a couple of weeks ago by the George Washington and the PAR Symposium. There were topics on this, inclusion. I've sat on a few papers. So inclusion is definitely of interest in the field, and much has been done in the management literature. And some research that I've done myself on inclusion and its impact on performance, inclusion and impact on turnover of LGBT. So that co-authors of mine have done, they're probably on this call too. So inclusion matters because it increases belongingness, as we talked about, acceptance, creates an environment that allows everybody to reach their full potential. And that's important, right? It allows everybody, not a certain group members. It also brings in multiple perspectives on problem solving. There was a research done where they got a very homogeneous group together and a very diverse group together. Who do you think solved the problem? These were college students. They gave them a problem. Who do you think solved the problem first? The diverse group or the homogeneous group? You can put it in chat. Diverse versus homogeneous. Which one do you think came up quicker with the solution?
Got a couple answers coming in. Most are saying diverse. We do have one person who was wondering about whether it was the homogeneous group.
So that's interesting. So a homogeneous group actually will come up with the solution quicker because everybody's thinking alike. But if I asked you who came up with the most innovative solution, that will be the diverse group, because the diverse group might take longer. So what they found was the diverse group took much longer to reach a consensus because there were different perspectives, there's more conversation, there are different ways they are seeing the same problem. They did come up to a solution much later, but it was a great solution, much more innovative, out of the box. And so it takes time. When you bring different perspectives into problem solving, it definitely takes time in an organization, and you have to be giving that time to your employees. Improves retention, improves performance. All of these are documented. It reduces complaints and grievances. I didn't want to fill these slides with a bunch of citations. So if you're looking for any, let me know. I'm happy to send that to you. And then also, if you think about it broadly, it creates sustainable workplaces and communities. I do some workshops for my city here, and we talk about how to create inclusive communities, and inclusion is a big piece of it.
Dr. Sabharwal, we had a question in the chat. Someone was wondering if you could please advise which study this is. Person's working on a paper on diversity and innovation. It would be helpful.
If you can send Sean, or I can take their email and send that to me, because these are various different studies, right, I'm putting together. So yes, I'm happy to send that to you after this. Thank you. And I'll put my email on the chat, so then you all can send any questions to me as well. So what are the barriers to creating an inclusionary environment? There are several barriers, but I'll focus on two today. One is stereotypes and prejudice, and then the biases that we have. There's fear, there's communication challenges, not walking the talk, especially we see that from the leaders, not investing in D&I efforts, and thinking of diversity and inclusion, almost inclusion as an end, and that it's done. It's never done. It's constantly evolving. So I want to focus on stereotypes and prejudice first. So what is a stereotype? Stereotypes come from a Latin word. Stereo means rigid, tupos means an impression. So you've cast this rigid impression in your head, or a shared generalization about characteristics of a certain group or class of people. And that's the definition that we use for stereotype. I can give you an example, a personal example. I am Asian Indian, and sometimes we have a lot of events. Indians love to party and have various festivals and things. So you go to these events and you talk to people, and usually the first or second or the third question comes up is, what do you do, and what do you work, and where are you working? And I tell them I teach at UT Dallas. And so the instant question back to me is usually, what engineering department? Which engineering department do you teach in? And then I tell them, no, I'm not in engineering. I'm public affairs. They're clueless, what public administration is. And again, that's a stereotype, right? That Asian Indians are usually just going to be in STEM disciplines. So that's a stereotype. Something that, I like to do with with any trainings I do, I ask them this. I look at this statement: I am, but I am not. So I'll give you an example. I am Hindu. That's my religion. I'm Hindu. I was born into it, but I'm not religious. So that's something about your own self that others may not see. If you can put it in chat, let's see what, we'll give you a couple of minutes to think about and put some ideas in chat.
Okay, we already have one. Do you want me to go ahead and start reading them out as they come out, Dr. Sabharwal?
Yes, please, Sean, and call me Meghna, please.
Oh, okay. So we have one from Dr. Elise Levine. I am Jewish, but I am not Orthodox or Hasidic.
Okay, great. Thank you, Elise, and hello.
So everyone, please feel free to put something in the chat. I am, but I am not.
I am, but I'm not.
Yeah. Oh, and while we're waiting for people to type, please mention, hello, great workshop.
Thank you.
Okay, we have Tinsley Spence Mitchell says, I'm American, but am non-white.
I'm non-white, yes, very good.
Stacy Zavataro said, I'm a professor, but it is not my identity.
It's not my identity. Excellent. Stacy, that's the way to go. Some people make it their identity.
So we have Lucky Angelov said, technically I'm Bulgarian Orthodox Christian, but not religious. Jacqueline Piatek says, I'm a professor, but I'm not from a college-educated family.
Very good. I'm sure many would identify with that. Yeah, that's great.
We have Vanchi Sen, Chinese is my mother language, but I'm not from China.
No, China, very good. Yes. And so based on all of this, people might make a lot of assumptions. Go ahead.
I'm sorry,
Sean,
I missed one. I missed one.
Okay.
I apologize for this, or somebody that came in. We have Guo Hubin Lee said, I am Chinese, but I am not studying STEM. So sorry, I missed that one.
Exactly, not studying STEM, right? If it's your Chinese, anyone from India, China, the South Asian, East Asian. That's wonderful. Any more? I move on.
We have one more. Stacey Adams says, I am an engaged white woman, but I am not a Karen.
I'm not a Karen. That's very good. Thank you for sharing. Now, these are all exactly because, you know, when people look at you or they know of your background, they may think or assume certain things. And that's not always true. You know, I'm Asian Indian, but I'm not fond of spicy food. You know, that's something I go to restaurants with my friends and the waiter comes in and automatically the wait staff will tell me spice level. They look at me and say 8 or 9 and I'm like, no, 0. Like I don't like spice. And my friends will laugh. My friends, Caucasian friends, and they are the ones ordering the most spicy food. But so these are things that we assume looking at people. And so I wanted, go ahead.
Oh, so we had two more if you'd like share.
Great.
So we had Vanessa Diaz says, I am Latina, but I am not Puerto Rican. And then in parentheses, she says, New York thing, LOL. And then Pooja says, I am from India and no, all of us are not obsessed with cows.
And not obsessed with cows, yes. Thank you for sharing that. Yes. These are all wonderful. If things come to your mind, feel free to put it in chat. We'll read it out later. But I wanted to get you all in some breakout groups, which Sean has really helped me and others are helping me with this too. So what we'll do is we'll put about 6 or 7, Sean knows the number, he'll put them in groups. You'll have a name to your group. You could be Asian American, or you could be Middle Eastern origin. I don't know, whichever group you get put into. What I want you all to do is there are 2 questions, whichever group you are. Read these questions. I know that, Sean's going to help and others are going to help you with these questions, but maybe make a quick note of this. What we never want to see, hear, or experience again as a member of this group, whatever group you belong to, and then what we want our allies to do. So talk amongst yourselves, take a few points, and we'll come back and discuss what you all found.
Welcome back. So Dr. Severall, can you hear me? One second. Dr. Severall, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me now?
Absolutely. So I checked through all the groups and it looked like the audio was working. So, the era of COVID, trying something like that, you always has a little bit of snags, but it looks like
sure.
Groups were able to talk.
Oh, wonderful. The 10 minutes are over?
They are. They actually are.
Oh, so we are all back now.
We are. But I can do. Yeah, that actually went quite quickly.
That went very quickly, very, very, very quickly. My internet says unstable. My fingers are crossed. That was very quick. I was in a group. I'm sorry we were talking and then, didn't even realize we were put back in here. So I imagine people have just barely started these conversations and I apologize. I wish we had much more time to talk about this. But there's something to think about. And I'm sure we all didn't get to even one of the questions or not to the second, but if anybody volunteers to share what they talked about in their groups, identify the group name and, whether you were white, non-Hispanic or Hispanic, non-white, any group. And then if you can volunteer, maybe Sean, can they unmute and talk?
Yes, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to allow everyone the ability to unmute themselves. So anyone who is willing to speak should be able to speak directly now.
Sean, I can go for our group if that's okay.
Yeah, please do.
Awesome. And I'm going to type in the chat for everybody what Vanessa said to get our conversation going. So thank you to Vanessa for that. We were in the Hispanic non-white group. And as you can see from Vanessa's comment, she said, so this is me, like this is literally me. So her comments, and for those of you who might not be from your computer, she wrote, I'd love to stop hearing people assume that Latinx are all the same with the same cultural traditions, for number one. And number two, she said, I said allies should work together to understand the different cultures, even if it's through food, which prompted an interesting discussion in our small group about really taking time to, understand kind of like what folks put in the chat. When you said I am, but I am not. There was a lot of comments that resonated, I know, with me and Halise specifically about being Jewish and what that means. And we were drawing that parallel with Vanessa and Michelle Evans, who's also in our group. And, she commented, that, she also wishes, like Vanessa, that this monolithic and limited knowledge base would change. And that's what allies can do, is really start the learning process themselves.
Dr. Sabral, you're still on mute. Sure, I'll go ahead and activate your mic.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Stacy, and all the members of the group. I think there's very good illustration of, how we are stereotyped into a certain way of thinking and what we as members of a certain group would want others to know. So thank you for sharing that. Anyone else wants to share, and then we can move on to the next.
We do have a comment from Dalton. He says no mic. So he says, our group was posting in the chat and he said, I never want to see, hear, experience stigma stereotypes toward millennials, always working to prove our worth or explain ourselves. We'd like to be acknowledged and respected for our knowledge, skills, and abilities.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. So millennials, they are in the workforce now, and they're big proportion of the workforce, and they are subject to certain stereotypes, and we don't want folks to see the group that way. I was put into a group as well. I was in the Black group, and Kerry, who was part of our group, said, I do not want ever a Black person being shot by police for any reason, and this must stop. And so, Kerry, thank you for sharing that. And we all hopefully share a very similar sentiment to Kerry. Kerry is also in Minnesota, where she's experienced this firsthand. And Kerry is a nurse, and we got quite emotional about this topic, as many of us, as you can imagine. So yes, Samantha also in my group said that she's from Mexico, but then what she sees there as people who are Black, and they are in the minority, she wants that discrimination and invisibility needs to stop for members of this group. And we didn't even get to the second question, but I just wanted to share that out.
Dr. Sabrawal, yeah. I was, because those 10 minutes did go quickly, and actually yes. the group ended at 11 minutes. So while we wait to see if any other groups want to respond, and I hope that you. Oh, okay, Pooja, please go ahead.
So I was in the white group, and I was with Nicole and Jose. And a couple of pointers. One particular point which Nicole made was white is considered standard against which everything is measured. So diversity is non-white, color is non-white, and white people. It is presumed that white people they do have a sense of entitlement, but most of them, I mean, a considerable section, they don't. White does not necessarily mean a Trump supporter. So that the second question, we could only discuss one point, which was the white. What we want our allies to know is that there is a considerable amount of support for other causes as well, for migrants, for the movement of Black Lives Matter. So there is a white empathy and it should not be presumed otherwise. This is how far we went.
Thank you, Pooja, for sharing that. And to your group members, I totally agree. You know, the diversity trainings or any of these things we talk about is not targeted to the white male in the room, and that's not the intent, and white doesn't equal racist. And so I thank you for bringing that up. Appreciate that.
And Dr. Serbal, we had one more. We had Logan Stewart made this comment. Our group didn't want allies to show support only during certain times of the month or certain times of the year, like Pride Month, but we want folks to be an advocate at all times.
Absolutely, absolutely. Go ahead, Sean.
Oh, and more. Okay, good. People are typing up. We have the group was assigned to women. It says one, not wanting to see inequitable expectations and treatment by society and men. And then also what they'd like to see from allies, support us, stop making assumptions, treat women as individual human beings, respecting individual capacity and skill sets, and reward them, i.e. no responsibility without authority.
Exactly. No, that's all wonderful. I think in terms of the point made about allies, don't just have a month. It's good to have a dedicated month, but then we have to have these efforts continuous. They can't be a just one-time thing and we forget about it, and that's not allyship. It has to be a continuous effort. You hear something, you see something, you say something. You know, that's important, and that's an ally. You stand up, you are in a meeting, you are in a group setting, you are in leadership or in a seminar or in a conference, and if things are being said, it's your responsibility, even if you're not a member of that group, to stand up and say something if it doesn't sit well with you. And so, and especially if you are in a position of power, you must say something. So that's important, and that's key to be an ally. So thank you all for sharing that. Sean, is there anything more or?
Those are all the comments thus far. But
okay.
Since the 10 minutes went really quickly, I was hoping to ask just a question for everyone, because we did have some private comments earlier for some people. What patterns have you, in your research, have you found with respect to answers to these two questions?
Well, I don't do specific research, but I do trainings around these. So I do hear a lot of things about, for instance, you know, women, that we are, you know, just not a pretty face, or we have more to give. LGBT groups, you know, don't stereotype us just because of our sexual identity. You know, all the things that you all have said. So nothing very different from what you all have said, but the typical stereotypes that we have in our brains, or that there's no book on stereotypes. I have not found one. Maybe you all have, but there is no book, right? There's no book on stereotypes that you read. Okay, now today I'm going to get up this morning and show and be discriminatory towards someone. That doesn't quite happen that way. We all have, with experience, with time, growing up, these stereotypes play as narratives, as images, as various visual, you know, images that come across. And so that's important to realize what our experiences show us all along, and where these stereotypes come from, which we'll talk about a little bit, but really very similar to what you all have been saying. Nothing very different. But the allyship part, you really must be proactive about being an ally, and then, you know, say something. Like I said, don't just, because if you're not going to say something, you are equally being a part of that, you're agreeing with that. So that's important. And I know sometimes it's hard, especially in group settings where there may be hierarchical structures, especially a society I come from, very hierarchical, very top down, and there can be hesitation. But then, you know, you must say something to someone who can relay that message to. So that's important.
And Dr. Sabharwal,
yeah.
So, I just wanted to mention here, we just had a very nicely detailed message in the chat from Christopher Buckingham of the Asian group.
Okay.
Do you want me to go ahead and read that out?
Sure, please.
So with respect to the first question, this was the group for Asian. It says, don't assume it's not as clean eating with hands. Not all STEM field backgrounds. Pretty good English, although born speaking English. Getting questions like, where are you from? Assuming that a person is from China or India, and also coronavirus stereotypes or assumptions based. Then with respect to what they want allies to do, advocacy, questioning the person and challenging stereotypes, educating, being curious, not asking person who's a minority to explain or educate. In terms of leadership, amplifying diverse voices, tapping into resources, not allowing mistakes from allowing allies to continue to advocate, and also minority expectations, not overlooking our own affinity group, they said. So quite a
Yeah,
detailed
no,
response.
very detailed, very good. You all were quick thinkers. In 10 minutes, you all really did a great job. I agree with all those stereotypes. I have certainly been subject to probably most of them. And, you know, I like the point about the allyship as well. So all points very well taken. I wish we could compile all of this and send it out almost. But yes, it's a proactive effort. It's a proactive effort that one needs to do. And we really need to listen. I think that's where the challenge is, that, you know, we are so polarized right now in our nation and around the world. I say that one is forgetting that we need to sometimes just stop talking and listen to the other side, you know, because it's all about taking that time to understand where that person is coming from. Because everything we see is from these lenses that we wear, and we think and we start believing what we see is the world, and it truly is not. So I thank you for bringing that point up about understanding each other. If it's okay, I'm happy to move on or continue these conversations. I love it this way though, but I can't see people, which makes me sad. Let me see and move on here. So clearly recognize when we fall in these stereotyping traps. We all do. We all have our stereotypes. Please tell me in the chat if anybody thinks they don't have a stereotype or a prejudice. We all do. So when that's happening, we'll talk about a few more strategies a little later, but recognition is that very first step.
Dr. Several, did you want to share your screen again?
Oh, it's not being shared?
Oh, not at the moment.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. It's an interactive webinar in the era of COVID, so.
It is.
Love it.
It's an interactive webinar. I love it. I'm going to start sharing here again.
Absolutely perfect. Thank you.
Can you see this now?
Absolutely. It looks wonderful.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to move this face thing of mine here. Okay, great. So the second thing that I wanted to mention were biases, right? These were some of the hindrances to creating an inclusionary environment. What are biases? And a bias is an unconscious, automatic thoughts, feelings about people influenced by social categories, you know, whether it's personal likes or dislikes. Now, the difference between a bias and a stereotype is that bias is a personal preference. You know, my liking for a certain food or a person or a group, or my dislike for any of this. So that's my personal preference. So that's a bias, where a stereotype, as we talked about, is more about members of a certain group. So it's a class of people. You're making generalizations about Asian Indians, for instance, or so that's the difference between a bias and a stereotype. There are various forms of biases. I imagine we have confronted some of this in our own works, in our places of work, in our own settings. We've seen this if we've not experienced it. The first one that I wanted to talk about was conformity bias, right? I love this quote from Killing a Mockingbird, To Kill a Mockingbird. People generally see what they look for and hear what they listen for. Right? And that happens all the time. We are conforming to the majority held ideals or beliefs. And this is very common in group settings, right? So think about what conformity bias can do in, say, recruitment, hiring, promotion, any of these things that impact careers of people and policy making. Think about when a group think mentality comes in. So group think is just, people all trying to reach consensus. One person who might be in a position of power or can speak over the other person, and that voice comes out, and then there is a consensus, there's a group think, there's a conformity bias. So be aware of conformity bias, because we do see it play out a lot in workplaces. The other bias I'd like to mention is affinity bias, right? Affinity bias is coming out of, what I like and the common likes and dislikes, and we automatically bond with people who have similar likes and dislikes. And we see that play out again all the time in work settings, in group settings, in organizational settings. So this is called that similarity bias. I was recently at an interview, and the candidate actually, of course, it was an interview. I was part of the interview panel. We were choosing someone for social media, and we interviewed 3 people. We shortlisted 3 people. The top 3 candidates, 2 of them were very extroverts. We talked to them on the phone, just wonderful. The third person, more of an introvert, but had the skill set that we needed. Now, I was member of this group of interviewers, and I liked the skill set that this person brought. But then the concern that was raised by other members in this panel was, oh my God, she's not an extrovert. Oh my God, I can't see her and me being friends. To which I had to kind of pause and say, well, are we hiring someone to go out and fundraise for us, or are we hiring someone to do, the technology stuff? What are we hiring for? So that's a question we need to ask. And they were like, yeah, of course. And I said, does it matter if we were hiring for a fundraiser or someone more outwardly? Yes, we would want those certain skill sets, but can this person do the job? But again, I'm just giving an example that these stereotypes play out. Oh my God, this is an introvert person. I may not be able to be friendly with this person, or do I have that interaction? In fact, I will say that was the best decision we've made. We did when we hired the third person who was introvert, but the skill set and just it's a personality type. But in this society, we do place a lot of emphasis on being an extrovert, especially in workplaces, especially for leaders, if you think about it. So just an example of this affinity, because she's not like me, she's not this extrovert out there personality like me, that we may not be good friends. Actually, they are great friends today. So that's just an example to show that these biases play in. The other bias I wanted to bring across, which is definitely exists in all societies. We've set our own standards for beauty, right? There's this beauty bias. Women who are 70 pounds under average weight, they are earning a certain amount of money, more than women who are overweight, but the penalty is less for men. In fact, overweight men make more money than if they are underweight. And there's been research around it. That, again, I'm happy to send anybody who's interested. But so thin men make less than overweight men, thin women make more than overweight women. NFL quarterbacks, we are obsessed with football. People with more face symmetry, they earn more, irrespective of their statistics, whether they've had a good season or not. So those, again, studies being done there. Women who wear makeup also have been considered competent, trustworthy, likable. There have been studies done on that topic too. So clearly there is a premium we are putting on this beauty bias that we have, and we've set our own beauty standards. If you think about it, 60% of CEOs in the US are over 6 feet tall. But what is that proportion in the population? Only 15%. So only 15% of US population, men are 6 feet or over. But if you look at the CEOs, they are 60% of them. So clearly we are putting a lot of emphasis on height. And if anybody knows me, there goes my chance of earning anything extra. Probably I'll be facing a penalty for the height. So again, these are biases that are automatically playing. The other one is attribution bias. Attribution bias can be described as this attitude that success belongs to me and failures is somebody else's doing. Especially if you're members of a certain group, you're willing to give members of your own group a second chance or the benefit of the doubt. But whereas if somebody's of the out group, you are judging them in a harsh way, you may not be willing to give them that second chance. So again, be mindful of this attribution bias. I see this play out in my classes all the time. Students will say, well, if they got a good grade, it's their hard work. If they got a bad grade, of course, it's the bad instructor. So that's, again, this attribution bias. So these are some biases that we are subject to. There are several more, but I thought I'll just bring out some of these biases. Any one of you, quickly in the chat, if you want to put, any one of you have confronted any of these biases?
Give people a few seconds to respond.
I definitely give a few seconds. Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes. That will give me a few seconds to drink water too. So.
Yeah, good. We have a couple of responses coming in. Zishan Noor says, no biases, but never had a benefit of my height, smiley face. Stacy Zavataro says, I look young and don't wear makeup, so I get the question, when did you graduate, all the time?
Very good. No, interesting examples, and that happens all the time. So these are biases we are not, the question is, where do these biases come from, right? Like I said, there is no book on this, or I'm not going to get up in the morning and say, okay, I'm going to be biased today. So where do they come from? But I think there's something in the chat, Sean, or something popped up on my screen.
Yes. So Zishan was saying about relating to being a brown Asian Muslim. Nicole Elias mentions about gender bias for sure.
Definitely. There's gender bias, there's skin color, anything that's visible, you are subject to more biases right away. Yes.
Samantha Varela says, when I was in college, a professor said to me, you morenita, dark-skinned, will always have problems to grow in your career. Look at the heads of organizations. They don't look like you. And then Logan Stewart said, I think a lot of it is the avoidance of being quote unquote less than or responsible for mistakes or negative connotations. Goes on to say, no one wants to be in the wrong and everyone wants to be seen as a good person. It's hard to confront your own biases, but it's the only way to grow as a person.
I absolutely agree. And we'll come to that point of, the first step is to look inward and really try to understand what your biases are. And until we don't do that, because like I said, everybody has these biases, whether it is skin color, as somebody pointed out. And I'm so sorry that professor said that to you, and that's so wrong. But we have set these standards. I know there's this big industry in India about skin whitening, and growing up, I remember we like, can you use this fairness cream? I was born in South, but I belong to the north of India, where typically the weather gives us fair skin. So I was lighter skinned than my counterparts in southern India, where I grew up, but I could see clearly the differences in the way someone was treated with a darker skin and light. So we have very similar things in this country too. The skin color defines everything. And so that is just absolutely just horrifying, and that has to change. But I'm glad we are having these conversations.
And Dr. Sabharwal, we just got another comment from Mariah Robertson. Says, hello, Dr. S. Are seeing many biases as a short, overweight African-American woman?
Oh, yes, and like I said, and I'm sorry about that, really. It is unfortunate that we have, as a society, in fact, there was a study done by Yale economists, and they found as early as kids of 5-year-old, how they were picking out leaders. And they were picking out very good-looking, skinny, tall, nobody told them these are 5-year-olds. And that's so interesting that how it's played into our brains since we are growing up, and it's very, very unfortunate.
Oh, and just a clarification, it says this person is Marcine. I think the name is coming out differently. It's Marcine. Dr. Sabharwal was on my dissertation committee.
Oh, Marcine is here. Hello, Marcine. Thank you for joining us. Yes, Marcine is wonderful. She's a professor now, and just a wonderful person to work with. So yes, I think we've set all these biases. We work under these biases knowingly, unknowingly, and biases are unknowingly most often, and they truly where they originate. I'm going to take you a little bit of a science. I belong to a science background, so I love science. But here's our brain. And you see that little thing called amygdala. That's our primitive part of the brain. And amygdala is what controls your, the flight or the fight reaction we've had. And if we didn't have amygdala, the species probably would not have survived, right? Because we saw the threat and then we protected ourselves. So we've evolved that way. But that's the part of your brain that if someone is not like me, it sees it as a threat, and someone like me, then there's automatically a different reaction. So there's this implicit bias.
Okay, looks like Dr. Sabharwal's internet has frozen.
Oh, is it frozen?
Yes, it froze up for maybe about 20 seconds or so.
Am I back?
You are back.
Okay, great. So I was talking about the brain and where this unconscious bias lies in that little amygdala that you all see, which truly helped us evolve as a species today, because amygdala is where the fight or the flight reaction happens, right? So if you're not like me, you see that as a threat and your brain is signaling you. And that's how we as a species have come to where we are. But this is where I was talking about the unconscious part, or what we call as implicit bias. In fact, Senator Harris made a comment about this yesterday, and she said implicit bias exists, right? This is not for political debate, clearly. And I mean, it refers to all these attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, decisions in a very unconscious manner. Sometimes we don't even know we are doing it. These are very unintentional. So now you will probably tell me, well, it's my brain who's acting up. What can I do? I don't control this part of my unconscious brain, but you can do something, and we'll talk about that. Quickly again, Daniel Kahneman, you probably all heard, the Nobel Prize winner, economist, and he's done a lot of work on this. And basically he says that 95% of your reactions or everything you do on a day-to-day basis are routine work, right? You don't have to think about it, you just do it. Nobody has to tell you that you have to get up in the morning and go brush your teeth. It's a routine, you do it. So it uses the system 1 processing. The system 2 processing is where you truly are thinking. And that is, the unconscious part lies in your 95% of that system 1, where our brain takes in all this information and it has these instantaneous reaction. This is where that unconscious bias comes into play, is at 95% of your brain. He's written a good book, Thinking Fast and Slow. I'm sure many people would have read that. So if not, I think you all should. It's a great book, which connects our brain to these kinds of thinking. So face it, the bad news is we all have stereotypes, we all have our biases, but the good news is something can be done about it, right? And so the question is, what can I do? What can I do about these biases? There's an article by Natty K, 2016, not in our field, but I found some very good strategies there. I like what she's saying basically is she's a consultant, diversity consultant, and she's given an ABS approach. Awareness of biases is your first step. Behavioral changes is your B, and S is that structural changes. So let's talk about the very first bias, awareness. And like somebody already pointed out, being aware is kind of the first step. And that is definitely important. If you are teaching a course on diversity or teaching in public administration, I teach a class on diversity, my very first exercise I have them all do is write up 5, sometimes I've received up to 15. I don't put a limit, but I say at least 5 pages of, think about all these various dimensions of diversity and think about what you were raised with, what are your biases, you know, do you recognize them? So it's almost a reflection. And people have given me some insightful things about their personal lives, where they grew up, what their experiences were, how that shaped their thinking around issues of race, sexual orientation, age, any of these various dimensions of diversity. So you can do that in your own classes as kind of that first step to talk about awareness. So some questions you may ask is, why am I being bothered by people of that group? Or why should I care about that issue or that person or that group? You know, why do I persist in thinking all members of that group engage in that kind of a behavior? Am I stereotyping? And I've seen this happen all the time. My husband and I are driving. I'm not very fond of driving, those who know me. And so anybody makes a wrong turn, my husband will be like, I know it's a female and I know it's an Asian. And so I try to counter that all the time. And we sometimes keep notes and I'm like, see, it wasn't a female. But again, we have these very, you know, these negative judgments that we may make about these groups. And if you're doing that, ask yourself why you are doing that. So keep tabs. I think that's important. And overriding stereotypes, you know, this is a conscious effort, right? This is that 5% of your brain where you make that very conscious decision. This is not the subconscious 95%. So you really have to train your brain. Your brain is like a muscle, so treat it as a muscle. You can train it. And so you keep these surprises. So these counter stereotypical instances, when they come up, make a note of it. And you'll see how many of these will come up. There are different tests out there. IAT is probably the most popular one you all have taken. It does have some challenges because you have to do it in a certain time. You have to be quick, and so there've been there's been some in the research controversies, or people are saying not the best test. So there's a new test that has come out, and it's relatively new. I also need to try it. It's Implicit Relational Assessment Procedure, IRAP. It does evolve from IAT, which was, of course, from Harvard. And so IRAP tests is talking more about the relational aspect. So you can take several of these tests and of course, keep a check of your own biases that you have. So that's the first step, right? That's the first step, is the awareness. Now, the second step is behavioral changes. So retrain your brain. Like I said, a brain is a muscle. You can retrain it to do a certain thing. So retrain by questioning your assumptions, your judgment, expose yourself to various stereotypical models, you know, a female pilot or a male nurse, you know, expose yourself to those images. Remind yourself that you are human and you have biases. I don't think anybody can stand up there and say, I have no bias. That's the problem. If they say they don't have a bias, that's definitely a problem. Also, like I said in the beginning, you know, we focus so much on differences. Find commonalities. Even if you are different, you have commonalities. You may love gardening, for instance, or you may connect on a certain point. And that's the point we are constantly seeking, is that connection when we meet different people. So find that. Engage in cross-difference relationships, right? It's very, very important. So you have your own group, but then engage in folks who are not like you. That's when you'll try and understand these cross-cultural differences that may exist, and you learn from it. And stop being, I've talked about it, stop being colorblind or gender blind or age blind. There is no such thing as that. So that's your second step. So the first is you be aware, and then make some behavioral changes, very conscious. And then the third is making structural changes. And this is something that I've been working on with my colleagues, Helise and Maria, on this research, specifically on structural changes. You know, leaders, again, like I say, constantly are talking about diversity and inclusion, but are they examining these various systematic or systemic differences that may exist, whether it comes to race or gender or ageism or any of these various isms that we see in our society, in our organization. So look at your structures, look at your policies, look at your procedures. They are these hidden structural inequities that sometimes we are not even aware of. My husband works for a technology firm, and they've started looking at the language they are using. So something they have started focusing on, for instance, they had in their manuals and procedures, they had white list and black list, right? So you look at that and say, why do we have the white is good, the black as bad, and what is this? So now they've changed that language. They've changed it to allowist and denialist. And so the other thing in technology they have is called master-slave configuration. And so they've changed that language now because master-slave configuration, but nobody was questioning it till now, and I'm glad people are questioning. So now they call it main or secondary or primary or secondary, something like that. So again, question, go look at your manuals, look at the language being used. I think that's very important. And of course, there are these, structural barriers that exist in workplaces that can cause what we call a second generation bias, right? Whether it's gender, whether it's race, they truly exist. And, for instance, if you have networking events, are you holding it at a time where women may not make it, or folks who take care of young children or older, can they come to these events? So be very mindful of those things as well as you go along. So certainly all this is good. Inclusion efforts, despite all of this, can go wrong. And the question is, why do they go wrong? Where do they go wrong? This is something we see all the time. It's faking it with tokenism. How many of you, just because you belong to a certain group, you are, I'm female, I'm minority, I'm foreign born, I can check many boxes. And then what happens is oftentimes you do get put on a lot of these surveys, different kinds of committees in your own places of work. You probably see these patterns, right? They just want sometimes a person of color there. And I don't know if they want me now because now I speak up, and they may not like sometimes what you speak up, but faking it with tokenism, that's very something we see in organizations. If that's going to happen, you have to stop that, especially if you are in a position of power. If you are seeing one of your faculty member being put on these various committees, you've got to put a stop to it. You talk to whoever is above you and say, this is not happening. Or if they are inviting you to certain things and they're not even listening to what you're saying, stop going to those things, and talk to somebody above you and say, my input doesn't matter. Why should I be there? So that's something that happens all the time, especially for folks of color, for women, people of different sexual orientation. That happens a lot.
Dr. Sabro, we had a great comment in the chat from Risha Pokhrel, who said, in our tutoring lab, we changed the term walk-in lab to drop-in lab as a way to be more inclusive in the language we use.
Very good. I thought, excellent. I'm taking notes here. Walk-in lab to drop-in lab. I love it. And I think that's what organizations need to do. Is, what we say has a lot of impact. And oftentimes we forget what we are, what message we are putting out there. So excellent. And I think organizations should look into this language. I think language is very, very powerful. Speaking of language, as faculty members or others in positions, you write recommendation letters. And so be very mindful. I have started being mindful. I was not so much, and I in fact caught myself doing this for my, female students, I would say, is involved with, a lot of these, is very, of course, intelligent, but caring, and is a group member, team member, which is all good, but these are associated with stereotypical, female characteristics. So I'm being very, very mindful of what I write in that and what language I use in my own recommendation letter. So yes, so language has a lot of power. The second place where these inclusion efforts can go wrong is this whole idea, like I said, about groupthink, the conformity bias, this chasing consensus, because people don't want to be part of this thing for a limited time in the day. They just want to reach a consensus and move on. And then they complain later on that this is not what they had envisioned. And so if you are part of something where you know you can make a difference, be mindful of that. Spend some time, think about those issues. Don't just try to reach a quick consensus. And sometimes then this consensus is mistaken as inclusivity. And so you don't want to give that message. If you disagree about something, or if you want more conversations about it, make sure you spend that time and you have that. So that's another part of why inclusion efforts can go wrong. The other thing that we see happen is you have one rule for some and another rule for others. That's where inequity is set in, right? And that's it happens all the time because we have these biases playing in. How many of you would have said, oh my God, my salary is less as compared to somebody I started with. We have similar backgrounds. Why do I get paid less just because I'm a female or just because I'm a person of color? So having this one rule for someone and the other rule or some exceptions for someone, not for you. If you are in a position of leadership, be very mindful of that. Several years ago, my mentor, Joe Care was a HR person and written several books, and he was in leadership role. And I asked him, Joe, what's your secret? What is it? And he said, be fair. Meghna, being fair is the most important thing for a leader to be successful, or for in any position. So being fair, and equitable that's the key. So you cannot create these rules one for one and the other for another. So be mindful of these things. Psychological cost of exclusion. There's again some research on this. I'm fascinated with brain research. Is this psychological pain of feeling excluded is, if you see, it's the same part of the brain which leads to physical pain. So if you were hurting physically, which is kind of the dorsal anterior part of your brain, your cortex, it hurts the same part if you were actually excluded. So it leads to stress, it leads to illness, leads to sleep disorders. So all of these things have been documenting. So if you exclude people, you are damaging their health, you're damaging their well-being. So again, being very, very mindful of what impacts exclusion can have on an individual, on members of a group. I would stop here by saying and repeating this quote by Joseph Stiglitz, again, Nobel Prize winner, professor at Columbia. He said, governments can enhance growth by increasing inclusiveness. A country's most valuable resource is its people. So it is essential to ensure that everyone can live up to their potential. People are the most important resources. We have to invest in them. And organizational cost, if you think about it, 80% is personnel, it's the people. And so if not just creating inclusionary organizational environments, work environments, but think about societies too, right? I mean, we all are this one big world, and how do we create an inclusionary society or a world to live in? We have to be very mindful of these things. So I'm going to stop here. I have my email. If anybody wants to email me, I'm happy to send you some research related to what I've talked today. But I know it's 5 minutes for questions. Is that correct, Sean?
Absolutely. But if people are available and if you're available, Dr. Sarwar, we could always go a little bit over. Could always
I'll hang around for a little bit. I don't think my meeting is till 2 o'clock. So I have another, I'm hanging around.
Yeah, absolutely. So if people would like to ask questions or make comments in the chat, we can do that there. We did receive one question behind the scenes. This person did ask me to ask it on their behalf. So if we want to start there, Dr. Sabharwal.
Sure.
So this person asks, in an era in which critical race theory has been banned from being taught in many aspects of government, what can we do in our own corners in the absence of these trainings?
If you are a student, you demand that your syllabus be more inclusive. What I mean by that, or if you are a faculty, please look at your syllabus, decolonize your syllabus. You see what readings are you including? Are you including readings that may not paint the entire picture, or is leaving out a certain group in the society, or so be very mindful, because that syllabus really is very important. And I know Richard will talk about it in one of these webinars, I think the last one. But I think that's the first step. If an instructor, if you're a student, you demand for that. Email your professor and say, what about X reading or Y? Continue these conversations, don't stop. And that's why I'm very happy that ASPA is putting money where its mouth is. I think that is important, because otherwise we are going to miss these conversations. Critical race theory is critical. I mean, that's why it's called critical race theory. And so again, this whole notion of colorblindedness, these things don't exist. You have to continue these conversations in your own groups, in your settings, conduct small webinars like this, conversation, dialogue cannot stop. And then of course that dialogue needs to translate into action, and holding your people in the organization accountable. So at UTD, they have University of Texas at Dallas, where I am, after all this movement, unfortunately, after George Floyd, the BLM, they've put together a task force, Living Your Values task force. And the Living Your Values task force basically found that, as student body, UTD is very diverse. In fact, it's probably the most diverse campus in public universities in the US, but our faculty is no way representative, or our staff is not representative, our leadership is not representative. And so now they have to hold the leaders accountable. And so clearly I'm hoping something good comes out of it. So there are many ways we can do. If you have small kids at home, talk about these issues, check on their biases to see what they are thinking. So continue these things. Doesn't matter whether there's funding for it or not. I think we can do it in these days. Nowadays, technology doesn't cost anything. We all can have these conversations.
Wonderful, wonderful. We were receiving a few comments praising the workshop. So thank you for taking the time. It was very informative, great discussion. And so if anyone, we still have time for some questions. So if anyone does have a question or comment, please put it in the chat.
Thank you all. I do want to say that continue these conversations in your own settings. Whether you're a student, whether you're a faculty, whether you're an administrator, or whether you're a practitioner, you need to continue these conversations and talk about these issues, because they're clearly there. We have slipped it under the carpet for way too long. And I don't think we can afford to do it longer.
Right. So again, more comments praising the workshop. So Dr. Sabharwal, just to confirm, people are welcome to write to you for follow-up questions.
Absolutely, my email is there, so please write to me if you have any questions. You're looking for any research. This is an area that if doctoral students want to work on, it's a minefield. A lot of work needs to be done here, especially in public administration. So yes. Pursue this if it interests you.
Excellent. And I just, again, more wonderful comments for you, Dr. Sabharwal. One in particular I want to emphasize here is from Marcina. Says, this was a great webinar. For the record, Dr. Sabharwal practices what she preaches and teaches. So I think that's...
Thank you. Thank you. That means a lot. And I think that's very, very important. Otherwise, it's just talk. Yeah, but thank you very much.
Well, excellent. So that's time. So what I'd just like to do, thank you again, Dr. Sabharwal. This was absolutely marvelous presentation. Again, we would have done this in ASPA 2020 in Anaheim, but we are in the era of Zoom right now. So we were talking before, and it looks like we're all going to have to get used to it for a little while, maybe till 2022. Are getting a lot of comments about it going spectacularly. Thank you so much for lending your experience and voice to this series.
And thank you to ASPA and all DSJ and other sections for rallying behind these efforts. And thank you, Sean, and all the members I know who have helped, Anna, Shahreen, Zishan, and others. who have helped with the workshop. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah. So one other thing, just like to mention, everyone, we do have the 2 RSVP links up here for number 3, October 27th. Join Dr. Stephen Patansu to talk about incorporating SETI into mission plans, performance management, and also number 4 was Richard Gregory Johnson, weaving SETI into curricula. So thank you again, Dr. Sabharwal, and thank you to my collaborators. So we have Nicole Elias helped out with this, Anna Marie Dimond.
Nicole, thank
We
you.
had Sharon Upoma. We had Shilpa Viswanath, and of course, Zishan Noor, who designed our slides. Thank you again, everyone, and hope to see you in person or another webinar soon.